Her wrists tremble. Your Honor, my father shouted, pounding the defense table hard enough to rattle the ice in the water pitchers. That woman is a drug addict, and she is entirely unfit to manage my mother's estate. His voice echoed off the high ceilings of the Charlotte probate courtroom. I kept my hands folded in my lap and traced the grain of the polished mahogany table. I let the silence stretch. I let the judge look at me. My father stood there, red-faced, breathing heavily, painting me as the monster of the family. He thought he was finally burying me for good. My sister, Madison, dabbed her dry eyes with a tissue, performing her usual grief for the gallery. Beside her sat her husband, Brandon, wearing a watch that looked expensive from a distance but cheap up close. He wore a sickening, arrogant smirk. As I sat there, listening to the man who raised me lie under oath, a strange warmth spread through my chest. They were digging their own graves, and they had absolutely no idea I was holding the shovel. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I am 34 years old, and for my entire adult life, my family treated me like a ruined footnote. To understand the sheer audacity of my father's lies today, you have to look back 12 years. When I was 22, my father quietly drained my college fund. He emptied $80,000 from my custodial account to finance Madison and Brandon's lavish wedding and to keep Brandon's failing business ventures afloat. When I found out and confronted them, the gaslighting began. Brandon sneered in my face and called me crazy. Madison weaponized her fake tears, crying to our relatives that I was trying to ruin the happiest time of her life. My father enabled every single bit of it. To justify stealing my future, he had to make me the villain. He projected his own financial failures onto me, labeling me unstable and troubled to mask his own theft. He kicked me out, forcing me to sleep on friends' couches and pull double shifts just to survive. They broke me back then. But sitting in this courtroom today, staring at their tailored suits and rehearsed tears, I am the one holding the hammer. Their loud arrogance is nothing but a desperate smokescreen. Behind those expensive clothes, Brandon's construction warehouse is secretly $1.2 million in debt to predatory private investors. And my father, in his infinite wisdom, co-signed those loans. They are weeks away from total financial ruin and potential jail time for investor fraud. They need my grandmother Eleanor's $2.5 million estate to save their own skin. And they are willing to destroy me all over again to get it. Brandon stepped forward, sliding a thick stack of glossy, official-looking medical records toward Judge Reynolds. He claimed these documents proved I was recently placed on a 30-day severe psychiatric hold at a private recovery center. This was a calculated, desperate shock and awe tactic. They knew a drawn-out legal battle would take months. Time they simply did not have. They needed the judge to grant an emergency, temporary freeze on the estate today, giving Brandon just enough time to illegally leverage the inheritance as collateral to pay off his dangerous debts. During a brief recess, the cruelty escalated. Brandon cornered me in the hallway outside the courtroom doors. Madison stood right behind him, glaring at me with absolute disgust. Brandon leaned in close, his breath smelling of stale coffee and panicked sweat. "You are a nobody. Sarah," he whispered, his voice dripping with venom. "You will leave here with nothing. Just like you deserve." I swallowed the lump in my throat. I looked down at the forged documents in his hand. I recognized the billing format instantly. A slow, quiet smile crept across my face. I walked back into the courtroom without saying a single word. Court resumed. Judge Reynolds adjusted her glasses, looked over the glossy pages. and asked if I had a defense. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my blazer. Brandon thought I was just a clueless receptionist. He bought into the family lie that I was a broken failure. He completely forgot that for the past 10 years, I have been a senior hospital clinic manager. I manage medical billing systems for a living. I know exactly what real national provider identifier codes look like. I bypassed all the legal jargon. I pulled up the federal public registry on my tablet, walked over to the court clerk, and officially submitted my screen into evidence. I asked the clerk to read the registration data out loud for the record. The clerk cleared his throat and announced that the billing code on Brandon's bulletproof psychiatric documents was actually registered to a mobile dog grooming and veterinary limited liability company. Furthermore, the physical address listed on the letterhead belonged to Brandon's own failing construction warehouse. The smugness wiped off Brandon's face so fast it was almost comical. The blood drained from his cheeks. The courtroom murmured in collective shock. He was not a criminal mastermind. He was a sloppy, desperate fraud, and I had just exposed his stupidity on the public record. Desperation makes toxic people incredibly reckless. Realizing his fake medical records were destroyed, Brandon panicked. He slammed his hands on the table, screaming that I was lying, that I had hacked the registry. Then, he dramatically pulled a folded, handwritten piece of paper from his jacket. He declared to the judge that he had a newly discovered handwritten will from Eleanor, supposedly written just before she died, naming Madison the sole heir. I did not flinch. I pulled out my phone and asked Judge Reynolds to admit one final piece of digital evidence. Months prior, when my grandmother was on hospice care, I had plugged a Wi-Fi-enabled smart charger into the wall of her study. It contained a hidden motion sensor camera to monitor her nurses. I left it active after she passed. Knowing my family's boundless greed, I hit play on my phone, casting the video directly to the courtroom monitors. The high-definition footage showed Brandon actively trespassing into Eleanor's locked, empty house just 3 days after her funeral. He sat at her on-tick desk. He used her vintage stationery and her favorite fountain pen so the ink would pass a forensic test. He was very smart about the paper. He was incredibly stupid about the hidden camera. But the visual was not the kill shot. The audio was through the courtroom speakers. Madison's voice echoed clearly over Brandon's phone on speaker. Just trace it against the window. Brandon. She instructed, make the loops match. Brandon's hands began to shake violently. He lunged toward the monitors as if he could physically rip the words out of the air. Madison gasped, covering her mouth in sheer horror. Her fake victim facade shattered into a million pieces right in front of the judge. Judge Reynolds slammed her gavel down, the sharp crack silencing the chaos. She found both Brandon and Madison in direct contempt of court. She ordered the bailiffs to detain Brandon immediately for perjury and submitting fraudulent documents, declaring she was forwarding the video and the forged will directly to the district attorney's office for felony prosecution. The resolution was swift and absolute. The bailiff stepped forward, pulling Brandon's arms behind his back and snapping cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. Madison sobbed hysterically, her perfect makeup running down her face. Finally realizing she was facing felony conspiracy charges and the very real threat of state prison, my father stood frozen. The toxic patriarch finally realized his golden children were ruined and his money was gone. His $1.2 million debt was about to consume his entire life. He took a hesitant step toward me, reaching out a trembling hand, trying to backtrack, trying to apologize. I stopped him with a single cold look. I looked at the man who had stolen my future and tried to erase my present, and I offered him absolutely nothing. No anger. No tears. Just silence. I turned my back on him forever. I walked out of the Mecklenburg County Courthouse and stepped into the crisp Charlotte air. The $2.5 million estate was legally secured in my name. The burden of being the family scapegoat evaporated with the wind. They tried to erase me. They tried to make me a ghost. Instead, I became their undeniable evidence. If you are watching this, you probably know what it feels like to be the target of a family that refuses to heal. Toxic families do not target the weakest member. They target the one who sees the truth. Because the truth is the only thing that threatens their shared delusion. When you are the only one holding the mirror, they will do everything in their power to convince the world that the mirror is broken. Let us break down exactly what happened here. Because the psychology of familial narcissism follows a very predictable script. People like my father and my brother-in-law build their entire identities on a foundation of lies. They need a scapegoat. They need someone to point at and call unstable. Because if they stop pointing at you, they have to look at their own massive failures. Their aggression is not a sign of strength. It is a symptom of their profound insecurity. I learned 3 vital rules through this nightmare. And if you are dealing with people like this, you need to hear them. Rule number 1. The loudest person in the room is usually the weakest. When my father pounded that table and yelled those accusations, he wanted to trigger me into an emotional reaction. Narcissists feed on your chaos. If you yell back, they win. Because they can point to your anger and say, look how crazy they are. But aggression is almost always a mask for fraud. Let them yell. Let them perform. While they are busy putting on a show for the crowd, you quietly build your case. Their noise will eventually deafen them to their own mistakes. Rule number 2. Silence is not surrender. It is a sniper's nest. For 12 years, I endured their insults. I smiled through clenched teeth while they flaunted the life they bought with my stolen money. But I never stopped paying attention. Gathering evidence quietly is infinitely more powerful than arguing with people who are absolutely committed to misunderstanding you. You cannot reason with a narcissist. You cannot debate them into becoming good people. You can only outsmart them. Document their cruelty. And wait for the exact right moment to let their own arrogance spring the trap. When you finally strike, you do not use emotion. You use undeniable, objective facts. Rule number 3, blood is a biological fact, not a lifelong debt. We are conditioned by society to believe that family is everything, that you must forgive and forget because they are your parents or your siblings. That is a toxic lie designed to keep abusers comfortable. You do not owe your sanity, your peace, or your financial future to people who use your DNA as a weapon against you. You are allowed to cut them off. You are allowed to mourn the family you deserved while completely rejecting the family you actually got. Walking away is not a failure. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. A few months after the trial, the final hammer fell. The judge sentenced Brandon to 6 years in state prison for felony fraud and perjury. With eligibility for parole after 4 years, Madison avoided jail time but was hit with 5 years of strict probation and ordered to pay $142,000 in restitution and legal fees. Without the inheritance to save him, my father's cosign loans defaulted. The private investors seized his house, his cars, and his retirement accounts. He is currently living in a rented room on the outskirts of the city. The community reaction was exactly what you would expect. The church friends and neighbors who once gossiped about me being the unstable daughter suddenly went very quiet. The truth has a funny way of silencing the peanut gallery. My father tried to call me a few weeks ago. He left a rambling, tearful voicemail talking about how much he missed his little girl, begging for a second chance. He tried to play the victim one last time. I listened to the entire message while sitting on the porch of the new home I bought with my inheritance. The sun was shining. The birds were singing. I did not feel an ounce of guilt. I had do it, blocked his number, and took a sip of my coffee. Today, my life is filled with chosen family, friends and mentors who respect my boundaries, who celebrate my wins, and who have never once asked me to shrink myself to make them comfortable. The peace I feel now is so profound, it almost feels heavy. Have you ever been labeled the problem just because you were the only one refusing to play along with their lies? Have you ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to love you the most? Drop a 1 in the comments if you are. Finally done protecting people who would never protect you. Share this story with someone who needs the strength to walk away today. You are not crazy. You are not broken. You are just awake. Keep your receipts. Hold your head high. And never let them see you sweat. I know exactly what you are screaming at the screen right now. You are probably watching this and thinking, why on earth did Sarah wait 12 long years to finally crush these people? Why endure over a decade of being treated like a financial doormat and the family scapegoat? Let us talk about the psychology of toxic families. It is a concept called the slot machine effect, also known as intermittent reinforcement. Sarah was not stupid, and she was not weak. When you grow up in a manipulative household, they do not just abuse you 100% of the time. Every now and then, they throw you a tiny crumb of hope, a fake compliment, a momentary smile, a brief period where things feel normal. So you keep pulling the lever, hoping that this time you will finally hit the jackpot of their genuine love and approval. It is an emotional addiction intentionally designed to keep you trapped and compliant. But when Sarah finally woke up and the illusion shattered, she executed an absolute masterclass in financial self-defense. Let us break down her smart moves. First, she used what I call the audit strategy. Scammers and manipulators absolutely hate details. When Brandon slid those glossy, fake medical records across the table, Sarah did not argue with his lies or defend her character. She targeted the data by looking up the national provider identifier codes. She proved he was using a veterinary clinic's information. The lesson here, never fight a narcissist with emotion. Fight them with hard data. Second, she mastered building the case. She did not just rely on her word against his in a he said, she said battle. She had a hidden, motion-activated camera that not only caught him forging the signature, but caught her sister coaching him on speakerphone. In the real world, the justice system does not care about your feelings. The person with the most documentation wins. Period. Finally, she executed the buyout by letting them hang themselves in open court. She legally secured the $2.5 million estate and completely cut them off without an ounce of guilt. She stopped trying to fix them and instead invested in her own permanent freedom. 6 months after Brandon was handcuffed in that probate courtroom and my father lost his empire of lies, I thought the war was over. I was managing my clinic, expanding our medical billing department, and finally breathing clean air. But the delusion of a narcissistic family does not die easily. It simply mutates into something more desperate. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when the heavy glass doors of my executive office swung open without warning. In marched Margaret, the mother of Brandon. If my sister Madison was the architect of fake victimhood, her mother-in-law Margaret was the absolute grandmaster of manipulation. For years, she had looked down her nose at me, whispering at family dinners that I was too ambitious, too cold, and entirely lacking in traditional family loyalty. Following closely behind her was a man in an ill-fitting suit carrying a faux leather briefcase. "We are not leaving until you sign this," Margaret demanded. I did not even look up from my laptop. "You have exactly 3 minutes before security escorts you out of this building." "Margaret, I highly suggest you choose your next words carefully." The man in the cheap suit puffed out his chest, attempting an air of authority. "My name is Arthur. I am the legal counsel representing the family in this civil matter. We have compiled a comprehensive dossier of severe financial discrepancies within your clinic's billing department. If you do not sign this waiver releasing my client's son from the $142,000 restitution and legally recant your testimony to the state board, this entire dossier goes directly to the Federal Medical Commission. You will lose your license, your lucrative clinic, and ultimately, your freedom." Margaret smiled a wicked, triumphant smirk that wrinkled the corners of her eyes. "You actually thought you could destroy my son and just walk away? You are nothing but a petty, vindictive little girl. Sign the paper, Sarah, or I will personally see to it that you are completely ruined." They genuinely thought they had me cornered. They thought the mere threat of a professional scandal would make me crumble and surrender the inheritance. But they completely underestimated what I do for a living. I do not just manage routine hospital billing. I am a trained forensic accountant who specializes in detecting complex medical and corporate fraud. I track missing pennies through labyrinths of offshore accounts and encrypted digital ledgers. Threatening me with a fabricated financial audit is like threatening a shark with a glass of tap water. I slowly closed my laptop, letting the silence stretch, just like I did in the courtroom months ago. I didn't yell. I didn't flinch. I calmly reached into my bottom desk drawer and pulled out a sleek black binder. I slid it across the desk until it stopped right in front of Arthur. "Let us talk about financial discrepancies." "Shall we?" I said, my voice barely above a razor-sharp whisper. While Brandon was busy practicing forging my grandmother's signature, I was legally auditing the supply chain of his failing construction business. I noticed a very peculiar pattern in the ledger. Every time he secured a fraudulent loan, specifically the mezzanine financing from the Vanguard Trust, exactly 22% of those funds were immediately diverted into a decentralized escrow account. That account then funneled the capital into a shell LLC registered under the name Jade Blossom Consulting. I tracked the routing numbers through 3 different offshore banks, mapping out a textbook money laundering sequence. Margaret's triumphant smirk instantly vanished. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a ghost under the harsh fluorescent lights of my office. Jade Blossom Consulting. I continued, tapping the black binder for emphasis, is legally registered to your private home address. Margaret, you weren't just an innocent, grieving mother caught in the crossfire of your son's mistakes. You were actively laundering the stolen money. You used those defrauded investor funds to pay off your own luxury vehicles, your private country club memberships, and your escalating credit card debt. In the eyes of the federal government, you are an unindicted co-conspirator to felony fraud. Arthur cleared his throat nervously, taking a rapid step back from the desk, eyeing the binder as if it were a live explosive. This is complete conjecture. You have absolutely no legal standing to make these wild accusations. I turned my cold gaze to him. My eyes locked onto his sweating forehead. "And you, Arthur, I ran your name through the state bar registry the absolute second you walked past my receptionist. Your license to practice law was permanently suspended 3 years ago for embezzling client trust funds. Attempted extortion is a very bold career pivot for a disbarred attorney. Here is exactly what is going to happen next," I said, leaning forward and folding my hands. You are not going to report me to any medical board because your dossier is completely fabricated. I, however, have already submitted the contents of this black binder to the district attorney's forensic fraud unit. I also forwarded the transaction logs directly to the IRS. They are exceptionally interested in undeclared, laundered income. Margaret gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck by a heavy blow. You are a monster. You are destroying your own family. You are not my family, I replied coldly, my voice devoid of any empathy. You are a parasite, and I have just permanently cut off your blood supply. At that exact moment, the blinding blue and red flashing lights of 2 police cruisers reflected off the wet pavement outside my window. Security had not just called to escort them out. I had quietly pressed the silent panic button mounted under my desk the second Arthur mentioned the word extortion. The police entered my office, heavy footsteps thudding against the carpet, handcuffs clinking at their belts. Margaret completely broke down, screaming and sobbing hysterically as they grabbed her arms and read her Miranda rights. She tried to fight the officers. Her carefully maintained image of the elegant, superior matriarch shattering into pieces of pathetic desperation right in front of my eyes. Arthur didn't even put up a fight. He just held out his wrists, knowing exactly how badly he had miscalculated his opponent. I watched them being dragged out of my clinic, their frantic screams echoing down the hallway until the heavy elevator doors finally slid shut, sealing their fate. Have you ever had to use the audit strategy to catch a liar in your own life? Drop your story in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button for more real-life survival strategies. And remember, stay smart, stay safe, and always keep your receipts.